My favorite video game series is, without a doubt, Dragon Age. The first game in the series, Dragon Age Origins, released in 2009, is held up by many to be one of the greatest role playing games ever made. Among the popular praise for the characters, the world building, and the spectacular role your many choices play in the story, there is praise for the game being a shining example of the dark fantasy genre. While plenty of role playing games take on the look and feel of classic high fantasy tropes like elves and dwarves, good versus evil, and kings and magic reminiscent of The Lord of the Rings, Dragon Age took those familiar elements to a more serious, more drab, more gritty feel by combining inspiration from Tolkien's tales along with inspiration from A Song of Ice and Fire. Dragon Age Origins was popular enough to garner a sequel with Dragon Age 2 in 2011, widely considered to be a rushed mess of a product that still has some merit as a smaller story with more intimate character dynamics. Dragon Age Inquisition was released in 2014 and won a ton of awards and sold millions of copies, the biggest and most successful game in the series, but not necessarily the best because many fans and newcomers alike bemoaned the reliance on open world design principles, bloated quest logs, and multiple game systems overlapping to form too much of a good thing. Still, the series as a whole was well respected by many gamers. A full 10 years later, Dragon Age the Veilguard was released, and people lost their minds. Perhaps rightfully so. I'm not here to get into all the reasons why people didn't like Veilguard, but one common complaint from fans that really stood out to me is Dragon Age Origins was dark fantasy, Dragon Age the Veilguard is not. Something has been lost at the very core of this series' identity, and whatever fancy combat moves or romanceable companions Veilguard gives us cannot hide the fact that Dragon Age has lost its way. Is that a fact? Did the series really lose what made it dark fantasy? To explore the answer, we're going to have to understand what dark fantasy even means, and that gets tricky. Genres are not especially well defined, they're often on more of a you know it when you see it basis. The problem with this entirely vibes based approach is that it plays into your already present biases. If you didn't like Veilguard's trailer being too colorful and bright, while Origin's aesthetic was all browns and bloodstains, you might not delve deeper than the surface level to see what dark elements are still present. So let's try to dig deeper and pin down something solid. What makes Dragon Age Origins dark fantasy? And from that definition, can we determine if Veilguard is indeed not dark fantasy? But first, we need to ask the question. Why does this matter? Do you need to correctly classify the genre of a piece of art in order to enjoy it? Well, no. The art exists no matter what, and your opinion of it is not changed whether we call it power metal, or fantasy speed metal, or them blokes who rock out to video games. I still love Dragon Force and I always will. What matters is whether you are in the mood for a hamburger or a taco. Both good food, but some days you want the taco. And if you walk into my neighborhood taqueria and order a taco and then I bring you out a hamburger, it doesn't matter how delicious that hamburger winds up being because you'll wonder why I didn't just give you the taco you ordered, paid for, and desired to consume. Dragon Age Origins is a magnificent, perfectly seasoned taco with all ingredients piled high in exactly the right ratio. Veilguard serves you up a hamburger and fries stuffed into a flour tortilla, and that's just a California burrito, and I actually like those a lot. This metaphor is getting tired. We're moving on. The point is that a genre comes with an expectation from the consumers, and failing to meet that expectation means failing to deliver the product that was promised. I'm going to propose 5 elements of a dark fantasy story, 5 essential ingredients that a story needs in order to be called dark fantasy. I'm going to talk about how these elements relate to Origins and Veilguard while skipping over Dragon Age 2 and Inquisition because the focus right now is on the alleged disparity between the earliest entry and the latest entry, not necessarily the incremental steps that may have gotten us there. By the way, if you haven't played any Dragon Age games, thanks for clicking. I will explain important parts of the games to you without getting too deep into the thick weeds that is this franchise's lore and without spoiling too much. I'll also be focusing on the games as stories and role playing scenarios without getting into the different game mechanics of combat and such, although there are some valid points that can be made about both games' approach to combat and how that creates ludonarrative dissonance or resonance with the dark fantasy elements. Intro over, hit the numbered list, let's go. Most online descriptions of dark fantasy I've found point to a secondary world, a world that is a creation of the author completely separate from our own Earth. This is not to be confused with a portal world like Narnia or Oz that is separate from our own world but accessed through it. A secondary world is easy enough to understand, but it casts a wide umbrella, so I'm going to try tightening it up a little. When I look at dark fantasy worlds, it always seems that they have lost something. A Song of Ice and Fire has left behind the ways of the old gods, as well as dragons and the Targaryen dynasty. For Dragon Age, the once great dwarven and elven civilizations have crumbled, the human savior Andraste has been slain, and the surface world has been forever marred by the blights. Origins undoubtedly fits this description, and Veilguard keeps the same setting of Thedas, so we should be good, right? Well, you see, Origins focuses on one kingdom in southern Thedas called Ferelden. Ferelden perfectly captures all of the elements of a world that has lost something. Veilguard shifts the focus to all of northern Thedas, which includes several locales. While Ferelden is dirty and its inhabitants are mostly dour medieval serfs and vassals trying to survive in a harsh world, northern Thedas features a lot of cleaned up places with mostly happy people resisting the changes around them. There's not so much lost as there is a potential of something being lost, like the picturesque cityscape of Treviso with its fashionable do gooder assassins quietly fighting against the occupying force of gray skinned dragon men. In Origins, that same assassin group was notorious for enslaving children and forcing them to kill each other to determine who would be the best grown up assassin. Other civilizations and places we have heard about in previous games have been similarly scrubbed down to be a lot more clean and appealing, like how there are no slaves to be seen in the established slavery capital of the world. Veilguard is a complete secondary world, but it doesn't always have the sense of something that was lost. Until we get to the game's main antagonists, a splintered group of three ancient elven deities who, in different ways, want to return the world to the old High Elven magic empire. This is where Veilguard saves itself in regards to this aspect of dark fantasy. You get to know the god Solus and see his memories played back in the Fade as he yearns for what was lost. He just has a terrible way to go about getting it back. I am giving Veilguard a checkmark in this category, and we are moving on. The second thing our dark fantasy story needs is an element of horror. Something scary and dangerous. There is horror to be found in Fear of the Dark, the lost and wild places of the world, and human killers and warfare, but this is fantasy, and we once again need to go a step further. The horrors must have a supernatural element. That could be magic, that could be monsters, that could be humans driven to violent acts by curses, maladies, and mutations. In its title crawl, Origins introduces us to the idea of the Darkspawn. Years ago, mages committed an act of hubris by trying to enter the realm of the gods, and in their punishment, they were cast down as bloodthirsty beasts who spread their destruction like a plague. This is plenty dark, establishes a world where consequences matter, and sets up our primary baddies of Origins. There are also some typical fantasy monsters, including undead, demons, and of course, dragons, but the Darkspawn immediately stand out as a unique take on the evil army trope. But that's not all that Origins gives us in terms of supernatural horror. There is magic, but not the wave a wand and say a magic word simplicity of something like Harry Potter. Mages are born with a kind of curse that allows them to influence the world with magic by tapping into the Fade, a parallel dimension of dreams and spirits. When one stares into the abyss stares back. Mages are at constant risk of corruption by demons in the Fade, and society at large has decided that the best way to keep tabs on this possibility of corruption is to lock all mages in concentration camps guarded by Imperious Templars who will cut down mages trying to break free. And by the way, there's a whole subschool of magic known as blood magic that involves sacrifices and deals with demons to gain more powerful spells, which some mages are drawn towards as a way out of their incarceration under the Templars. In Veilguard, the Darkspawn are still around. Two of the returned elven gods, Elgernon and Gillinane, create another blight and summon a new swarm of Darkspawn upon the world. Blood mages are also still present in the form of an apparently massive cult called the Venatori. One of your companions is possessed by a demon of spite, another companion studies on death, and your own character experiences haunting dreams in the Fade where you connect with Solus. The supernatural horror is still very much present. Maybe not as gross or viscerally horrifying as some of the extremes found in Origins, but the elements are still there. I am giving Veilguard another checkmark in this category. We have our world, we have our monsters, our dungeons, and our dragons, if you will. Now, how do those elements affect our characters? High fantasy typically has our heroic protagonists overcoming perils with little doubt as to their survival. To create some contrast, our dark fantasy stories should provide that doubt. This makes the horror more frightening, and it makes the world more gritty by truly establishing that danger is around every corner, and that danger can and will harm the ones you hold dear. We need danger, and that danger needs to be intense enough that it makes us worried for the safety of our protagonist and their companions. Dragon Age Origins is particularly noteworthy for its origin system. At character selection, you are not just picking your race and class, you are picking between 6 different playable backstories that take up the first hour or so of gameplay and establish your role in the setting. Based on your decision, you will get to see the mistreatment of mages, the dangers faced by nomadic elves living on the fringes of society, the infighting of the human noble houses, the even worse infighting of dwarven noble houses, the even worse mistreatment of the lowest of the dwarven caste system, or the appalling abuse of the elves living in alienages established by their human rulers. We don't even have to get into all the ways you and your companions can and will die in the main game. The story lays out in the tutorial what a dangerous world this is and how you will have to fight to survive. Hang on, we're getting deeper into Dragon Age here, and that's great. But what if we go just a tiny step wider and introduce another intellectual property to the conversation? That's right, I'm going to talk about Berserk. Berserk is my favorite piece of fictional anything ever made, and even more people regard it as definitively dark fantasy, making for a great comparison when trying to establish Origins and Veilguard's dark fantasy credentials. Berserk's first pages open on our muscular hero having sex with a demon before killing it with his cannon arm. The first chronological pages, our own origin story for Berserk's protagonist, named Guts, shows a tree full of hanged peasants. One of the peasants gave birth as she died, and that baby is Guts. Brutal, grim, surely dark fantasy to the core. Berserk has a secondary world that has lost its magic and lost its innocence to a 100-year war. It features loads of supernatural horror in the form of the 5 eldritch deities of the God Hand and their demonic apostles, and surely has palpable danger for our protagonist and his companions. When we are introduced to Guts after the demon sex murder scene, we see that he has lost an eye and an arm, and he has seemingly lost all his friends to some unknown incident with his nemesis. In an extended flashback known as the Golden Age arc, we are shown exactly how Guts lost everything and became the Black Swordsman. That's 3 checkmarks for Origins, 3 checkmarks for Berserk. Now, back to Veilguard. Veilguard's approach to danger is a bit different. The opening scenes of the game focus not on your backstory as the player protagonist Rook, but rather in medias res, as Solus is attempting a ritual that will merge the material world of Thedas with the raw magic of the Fade by tearing down the magic separating the two worlds known as the Veil. Shenanigans ensue, Rook makes it out completely unscathed, and the botched ritual unleashes Elgranon and Gillenane to wreak more havoc that will form the bulk of the next 40 to 100 hours of gameplay. Rook is already established to be more than proficient in dealing with these things, and their only personal loss going into these events is whatever backstory you made up for them in your own head, as opposed to the brutal spiritual pummeling you took playing through your choice of origin. You go on to make a group of friends and have therapy sessions with them about how you're all going to get through this together. The villains are still dark, but the danger is not always felt. And yet, in Veilguard, it is possible for you to lose every single one of those colorful companions. Non-player characters get killed in horrible ways, and some of the lovely locales you visit can be completely ruined by the unfolding of events that you helped cause. It is possible for the comic relief Matt Mercer skeleton to be killed off. It is possible for the adorable baby griffin to die. I'm sorry, but that is dark. The danger is there. It may take a while to get to that point, but I promise you, by the time it happens, it is devastating. You may be surprised, but Veilguard gets another checkmark. Stories need characters. High fantasy tales have unambiguously good characters facing unambiguously evil characters, but dark fantasy introduces tones of moral grayness into the mix. The villains may have good reasons for doing their dastardly deeds or perform seemingly good deeds to evil ends, and the heroes could either achieve their good ends by questionable means or have selfish reasons for choosing a path which only appears to be good. I am going to go out on a limb with this factor and say that not only do there have to be morally gray characters in our dark fantasy tale, but our protagonist has to be one themselves. In Origins, your playable character is going to be known as the hero of Ferelden no matter what. You are going to defeat the Darkspawn by slaying the Archdemon. The video game needs a final boss fight for you to triumph over, and the developers need some semblance of a canon endpoint for the many branching paths to reconvene. But how do you defeat the Archdemon? Well, your options are sacrifice yourself to absorb the Archdemon's soul so that you both die forever. Command your Himbo Prince companion to the same fate. Command the secondary antagonist of the game to the same fate if you have him join your side in the climax, saving you and the Himbo Prince, but restoring the heroic reputation of someone who did a lot of really bad things. Commit a profane sex ritual that will allow the Archdemon's soul to be absorbed into the unborn fetus you conceive, meaning no harm will be done to you or the mother, but establishing an unknown future for the god baby that will now be born. Command the Himbo Prince or the secondary antagonist to commit the same profane sex ritual because you don't have the right parts, but you still decide making a baby is the best way out of this. This is all dark. No matter what choice you make, a sacrifice must be made for the evil to be defeated. And while the hero of Ferelden will be viewed by Thetis as a force of good no matter what you choose, there is also the matter of the steps you took to get to this point. Origins offers the possibility to make many noble, do-gooder choices, but it just as frequently provides the alternative. In Origins, it is possible to personally kill a majority of your companions, sacrifice a group of slaves to increase your own health pool, personally kill a 10-year-old child to halt their demonic possession, sacrifice the mother of that 10-year-old child to enact a blood magic ritual that will halt their demonic possession, vengefully see to your brother's death as a dwarven noble, allow a Templar to be held indefinitely in the thrall of a desire demon, kill off an entire clan of elves to gain an alliance with the werewolves, kill off an entire clan of werewolves to satisfy the vengeance of one elf, condemn an entire concentration camp of mages to death, and condemn the souls of untold numbers of dwarves to be placed into the bodies of golems to bolster your own war assets. And a lot more bad things, but consider those my top 10. You get the idea. Your hero of Ferelden can be an absolute bastard throughout the game, ruthlessly stomping over everyone in their path to achieve your status as hero, with the game actually questioning the nature of that heroism. And yes, it is possible to play the straightforward good guy, but that path will be the most difficult and offer the least tangible rewards. In Berserk, the Black Swordsman Guts is early on shown to be willing to put a child in danger to get one step closer to killing his demonic quarry. He regularly kills and brutally maims soldiers following orders just as easily as he kills demons, and he seems to take glee in doing it. He displays a callous disregard for friendship, love, and life in general in his singular pursuit to kill his way up the apostle chain until he can one day slay his nemesis. Guts is absolutely a morally great protagonist, a dark anti hero who slays evil demons but loses pieces of his own humanity in the process. But hang on. We're looking at the contrast between early and late Dragon Age, but what about early and late Berserk? Is the granddaddy of dark fantasy manga actually dark fantasy anymore? Because while early Berserk features our protagonist embarking on a lonely journey through the darkest depths of despair and rage, later Berserk has Guts attract a group of friendly followers that includes an adorable witch girl, a pampered young noblewoman trying to learn how to help people less fortunate than her smooth and soft spoken protector, a young ward sidekick who Guts trains to fight, and not one but two comic relief support healer fairies. They fight demons together as a team and overcome greater odds than Guts could by himself with the help of a few magical artifacts and, dare I say, the power of friendship. Guts himself grows to be a more responsible and empathetic adult, becoming a guiding figure to the group that also supports him in turn. He still slays demons in ridiculously violent fashion, but he hasn't killed a mortal in a long time, and he more often uses his strength to protect others. So, is Guts still a morally gray protagonist? We're not sure. Origins and Veilguard have the benefits of being complete stories fully told, but late Berserk is ongoing, and at the time of recording, Guts is at a breaking point where we will have to see how he emerges out the other side, bolstering his best heroic traits to seize the day and emerge victorious, or succumbing to his old nature to win by any means necessary. I am giving late Berserk a question mark in the category of a morally gray protagonist. It keeps a check mark in secondary world and supernatural horror, but I'm actually going to give it a red X in palpable danger because it has been so long since our heroes have faced the most dangerous enemies in the series that actually stand a reasonable chance of killing them. How about Veilguard? Is Rook morally gray? No, not at all. Early in the game, you come across a thoroughly blighted village, and the only survivor is the mayor who willingly turned over the village to the elder gods in the hopes that he could save some lives. You get a choice to forgive him and free him from his tentacle binds or leave him to his fate. And that's fine as a choice, but rarely do more opportunities like this come up. You get a series of binary choices with your companions, but they all boil down to changing their attitudes and their special outfits. You do not have the option of killing them or ruining their lives like you did in Origins. The end game features possible consequences for your companions based on how much side content you felt like completing, but the final boss fight comes down to a choice to fight Solus, trick Solus, or forgive Solus. No matter which one you do, Solus is the morally gray villain, and you are the morally good hero who stops his schemes, as well as the one who stops the schemes of the unambiguously morally evil Elgernon and Gillenane. Rook is not morally gray, they are always good, no matter what you do, what dialogue choices you pick, or even what headcanon you apply to your choices, because the story leaves little leeway for different interpretations to peek through. So, here we finally are, a big red X for Veilguard's dark fantasy credentials. But we still have one more aspect to talk about. I tried to avoid including this on the list, but after several edits, it became impossible to ignore. This project started out of my desire to find something definitive rather than vibes based, but at a certain point, the vibes do matter. We need to talk about tone. It would be too easy to just say that we need a dark tone, so let's pick a different, more specific word like gritty. Gritty media can be defined by daring to show the unpleasant aspects of situations in an effort to be closer to the realism within the world the fiction presents. The Lord of the Rings has an evil army threatening an evil takeover of the world, which would spell disaster for mighty elves and little hobbits, yes, but a song of ice and fire gets down in the muck to see how the decisions of even good nobles have consequences for the small folk trying to live their meager lives in a fantasy world. One is not better than the other by this fact alone, but The Lord of the Rings focuses on the power of hope and small acts of bravery in the face of overwhelming dread, while A Song of Ice and Fire is more about the harsh consequences of trying to make choices in a world that offers no happy solution. Origins offers a similarly bleak perspective. No matter what you do, a sacrifice must be made to slay the archdemon. You cannot save the heroic army of the valiant king and your mentor in Act 1, they will always fall to the Darkspawn. You will not save the town of Lothering, it will inevitably be overtaken by the Blight. But not all situations are so dire. It is possible to make peace between the werewolves and the elves. It is possible to save the 10-year-old possessed boy and his mother if you also tried hard to save the mages who the Templars were prepared to condemn. It is possible to spare the life of the assassin sent to kill you, and he will become one of your most loyal and charming companions. This third option is not always presented, but it is presented sometimes, and it prevents Origins from going past the realm of dark fantasy and into the dregs of grimdark. Lives can still be spared, you can still be generous and just, there is still hope. Early Berserk also has elements of hope. The Hundred Years' War is ended. Guts tries to find meaning in his life beyond just being a sword for hire. He finds love, and he and his love interest actually halt their culminating sex scene midway to address their respective traumas and overcome them together. This is not a grim, dark story, it is a story in a dark world where characters can still choose to hold on to their tiny spark of light. That light threatens to be cast away in the eclipse, presented as the worst thing ever, and is probably the most dark series of events I have ever seen portrayed in fiction. But Guts does survive, and the series' predominant theme becomes struggling against the darkness. Is the tone gritty? Yes, but it is not devoid of light. Late Berserk seems to be a lot less gritty. Fight scenes don't carry the same sense of danger they used to, demons are not as omnipresent as before, Guts and his friends take a long boat ride to a magical island of fairies to heal his love interest who lost her mind in the eclipse. Early Berserk still had the fairy Puck fluttering around at Guts' side, but he existed as an angel on his shoulder and a kind of foil to reflect how far gone Guts was down the path of rage. Late Berserk turns Puck into a chibi-fied chestnut that cracks jokes aimed only at the audience. The tone has undeniably shifted. Meanwhile, Guts' nemesis has become all-powerful and raises his own glittering kingdom, shielded from the evils of his own creation and protected by monsters from his own army of apostles. This is where the gritty tone is still present. While Guts and his band of adventurers embark on their magical journeys, the tension builds with the knowledge that they cannot outrun the rising tide of the God Hand's influence upon the world. One day, the two will clash. That clash happens, and I won't get into specifics, but there are significant consequences for Guts and for the land of fairies. I am keeping the checkmark for Late Berserk because even amidst all the comedy and group therapy, there is an ever present undertone of a dire threat that cannot be outrun forever. Veilguard also has a dire threat that our protagonist must inevitably face. But rather than run from it, Rook strategically prepares for and seeks out the fight against Elgar'nan and Gillenane. Winning the fight seems like a foregone conclusion from the onset of the villain's introduction. Rook will gather a team, bolster the ally factions, and face off against their enemies in a dramatic finale. There's also a lot of humor along the way. There have been a lot of complaints about the, quote, quippy Marvel dialogue in Veilguard, and they're hard to ignore. Origins actually has a lot of comedic moments, but there is a line between comic relief in the face of dire situations and comedy overshadowing the dire situation in a way that shifts the tone to something much less dark. I think it is safe to say that Veilguard crosses the line. not just with its comedy, but with its insistence on building friendship between the cast of companions and tertiary factions. The focus of the game and the story is not so much about preparing for the final fight, it's about forging these friendships. And that is not necessarily a wrong or bad choice. Veilguard has its dedicated fans, and if you don't believe me, just check out the Tumblr tag. There is a place for stories where friendly conversations overcome the worst things in our world. But is that place in the realm of dark fantasy? Sadly, I don't think so. Veilguard gets another X in this category. So, we've defined dark fantasy. Dragon Age Origins hits all the marks, Early Berserk hits all the marks, Late Berserk hits most of the marks, and Veilguard hits 3 of 5 marks. I think that Veilguard is actually a lot darker than most people give it credit for, but that doesn't mean it remains a dark fantasy tale. I hope we can understand why a little better now. Is Veilguard a bad game for not delivering on the dark fantasy expectation? No. I think Veilguard is a good game, actually. I don't think it will reach the legendary status of Origins, but who knows how differently we will view both games in another 10 years. Late Berserk may not be as dark as Early Berserk, but I love it just as much for different reasons. I had a good time playing Veilguard on my first playthrough, and I know I'll discover more and appreciate more on my next playthrough. If you're one of the Dragon Age fans who felt let down by Veilguard's new aesthetics and tone, maybe one day, when it's on sale, you'll try it out and appreciate the parts of Thedas that are still there. And if you want to create your own story within Thedas, try getting some friends or internet randos together for a role playing game set in Dragon Age's setting. For those of you who found this video and don't know about my channel, I focus on tips and reviews around D&D and other tabletop role-playing games. I clearly enjoy dark fantasy things, and I intend to ask how dark fantasy can manifest itself in the tabletop role-playing space. Sometime soon, I want to use these same 5 criteria to look at the world's greatest role-playing game, D&D, my current favorite role-playing game, Symbaroum, and maybe some other games if I feel like it. Before I make that video, though, I'm interested in hearing your comments about Dragon Age, Berserk, and if you think my 5 criteria for dark fantasy are reasonable enough to use in other pieces of media. Thanks so much for checking this out and watching till the end. Have a nat 20 day. Bye bye.